he promised her this beautiful life together, that they could run away and build this wonderful dream together, have this family, and everything would be perfect. My father, he was charming and he was very charismatic, but he was also terrifying to anyone that knew him.
You deceiving, lying. You don't tell me what to do.
Some of the messages that I heard were just completely bone-chilling to me.
I watched him hurt my mother. I watched him beat her.
This isn't just a bad person, this is an evil person.
The next time you lie to the cops, you're gonna suffer the consequences.
There's shooting over here. Where at? In our apartment.
Attracting guys, like guys were always attracted to her for her beauty. She had a very unique look. A lot of people were definitely drawn to it.
She met my father in high school.
Obviously, her being just 16, there was a concern there of the age gap and maybe the influence that he had on the choices that she was making. I think my aunt and uncle were maybe torn because he presented himself very well, was very polite, and made very good conversation. And so I think in a way that impressed them.
My father had portrayed himself as he was like a little bit more stable, I guess, than other guys. He kind of portrayed like this kind of like bad boy vibe, and my mom was attracted to it.
I remember very distinctly the opportunity to meet him for the first time. She brought him to the house and he pulled up in the front of the house in a really nice car. He got out very handsome, just a beautiful looking man, dressed really nice. I kind of came from a rural setting where the boys never dressed like that. And so I was like, oh, something I would have seen in a movie. She became very consumed with her relationship with him. And often when I would try to call, this is before cell phones, so if I tried to call the house, my aunt or uncle would say, oh, she's not here, she's with Tom. I just remember very distinctly her infatuation with him.
Everyone thought the world of him. They thought he was so charming and so kind and so sweet. And I know my grandmother thought he was a good person. She thought he was a good man and thought that he treated my mother well. And at some point, he convinced her to run away with him.
They made the decision together to move to California. She didn't share a lot of details other than she was very excited about it.
I think he promised her a life and a family. My mother, she always wanted kids. She loved children. And I think he promised her this beautiful life together, that they could run away and build this wonderful dream together. They could have this life, have this family, and everything would be perfect.
There was a little bit of a ripple effect of shock because none of us knew. I remember that I felt very betrayed and I felt very hurt. And I remember going, what just happened? Like, how did this girl that was a very much an active part of our life, I would consider her one of my best friends. How did we go from that and these weekly conversations and this time well spent to not even knowing about her wedding, not even being invited to her wedding? I was very saddened that she had chose to run away and leave the family and leave school and leave her sports and leave us.
The hard truth is that they struggled in California. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the way he had sold it to my mother.
They had some problems in California. My father, he had gotten in trouble with an apartment complex. From what my grandmother tells me, my father would poke holes into walls and he would peep. He would watch people. but he was doing things that he shouldn't, and none of us really understood what that meant. It just appeared as though they were running away from whatever it was he got himself into. They came back to Colorado, and they bought the house that me and my brother grew up in. I wish I could ask my mother what she thought or felt, but maybe she thought that if we have a baby, it'll change. Maybe everything will be okay. She found out she was pregnant with me, and I think she began looking for more support from her own family.
When Cheryl became pregnant with Shelby, a spark came back to her, and she was very excited about the prospects of being a mom. And then, of course, when Shelby arrived, then a few years later, Sean comes, and she was just so full of love and joy.
Having 2 children and having this family, I think it began to shift her focus, and I think that's when things started to change.
My mom's world stopped revolving around him, and that it started revolving around us, and that she was prioritizing us over prioritizing him. He liked to be the center of attention, just kind of like a narcissist that way, and only ever thought about himself. Coming back to Denver was kind of the beginning of the end. They just started experiencing a lot more problems, and my dad started to become more aggressive. He would yell, he would throw things, he would break things. And it scared her, it scared us.
I have a lot of memories from being a child and living in that house with my mother and my father. You know, I remember him reading me books, but I also remember him screaming and throwing things. And I remember my mother crying, and I remember just being terrified.
I began to notice a change in Cheryl. Something was just a little off. Her luster for life was very much diminished. It just seemed, when you were around them, it seemed very tumultuous and a lot of anxiety and nervousness.
There were times where he would start shouting, and him and my mother, they would argue in their bedroom. And I could see through the door, the crack in the door, I could see him yelling and screaming at her, and I'd see him hit her. I think she began to realize that maybe my father was not the man that she thought he was. He was not the person that she thought he was, and I think she knew that he was a danger to me and my brother. My father, he was charming and he was very charismatic. He was intelligent, he was good looking, he was easy to talk to, he was normal. But he was also terrifying to anyone that knew him. For my father, it was always about power and control. That's all it was ever about. He told me if I spoke or if I told anyone or talked about anything, he would hurt them.
I remember him making comments about Cheryl's looks, negative comments about her looks, and negative comments about her being a mother. I remember being pretty angry at the way he was treating her. She was always on alert, and she was always very concerned about what he was going to do to her or to her kids.
They were pretty broke. He struggled to maintain a job. He was just stuck, and he was stuck not being the priority. He was stuck having no power, no control, and of us coming first. When the emotional abuse, the yelling, breaking things wasn't effective anymore, he escalated in his behavior, get more physical.
I watched him hurt my mother. I watched him beat her, and he would scream at her. He would throw beer bottles.
When he started getting physical, she would have a bunch of bruises on her. And that sounded the alarm for a lot of people, and thought the best way to go was just to call law enforcement and have them deal with it.
When somebody calls to report a crime of domestic violence, they're obviously looking for help. In Cheryl's case, Making the call to the Thornton Police Department at least initiated the start of a police response, the start of victim services, and the start of her journey through the court system. Kim was a victims advocate, and they're a part of the detective division. They're a resource for the family, the victim's family, or the victim.
The first time I met Cheryl, she had reported to the Thornton Police Department that Tom had assaulted her. She would describe how he would grab her when she would try to leave the room. He would hit her. There was sexual abuse where it was like male privilege that she was going to have sex with him. And that was an experience that I believe that she had often. I think the scariest piece for Cheryl was her two children, Sean and Shelby. She was very fearful of Tom and his reactions.
He would get very angry. He would threaten to hurt us, or he would threaten to hurt my mother. Fear was what he used. He knew how to make people afraid.
Tom's abuse continued to get worse and worse. The more she stepped away and set those boundaries, the more aggressive, he got. She began to see the need to protect the kids even more.
I remember him throwing things against the wall, and I remember just being terrified. My mother was a very strong woman, very, very strong. She was strong for me and my brother, and she always kept it together. She did her best to shield us from what was happening.
When she saw that Tom wasn't treating us right, I think it broke her heart. She was okay with him treating her like crap, but she wasn't okay with him treating her children like crap. And I think that was a huge push to leave him.
My mother reached out to the police department many times. She filed restraining orders, protective orders. Kim was helping my mother through all of these issues with my father.
She got a protection order as she gained more courage and was leaving the relationship.
She realized that, if she stayed with him, that she was gonna end up dead, that we were gonna end up dead.
I remember the day that we left, there were 2 suitcases in my closet, one for me, one for my brother. Well, my father, he told me to go get him a beer. I gave him the beer. And my mother, she told me to grab my brother, grab my suitcase, and get in the car. And that's exactly what I did. And as we're driving, pulling out of the driveway, my father comes out in a towel, and he is screaming and yelling, and he throws the beer bottle. She was brave and she was strong, and it took so much courage for her to make that decision to leave, because leaving those relationships is dangerous, and it can kill you.
I appreciate Cheryl's bravery so much. If someone is living in that situation with a manipulative, narcissistic, abusive person, by all means, get out.
I think one of the really positive things about Cheryl leaving the relationship was it really empowered her to be able to make her own decisions. As Cheryl began to leave that relationship, he was financially taking things away from her, not giving her, money to buy food, to buy clothes. Domestic violence is all about power and control and manipulation. She had to work more because he was not providing her the money that he said he was. He wasn't paying the bills. He wasn't doing the things that he needed to do.
My mother worked as a waitress. She worked a lot of hours, and my grandparents would help with me and my brother.
A lot of the time she was working 2 or 3 jobs just so we'd have a roof over our head and we'd have food and heat, and she would drop the world for us, and she would always put us first. She would do whatever she had to.
Because he still had visitation rights, she could potentially be harmed or could potentially have to deal with his anger and his wrath.
I do know that she felt very empowered that she was able to get out, but I also think that that was the moment that it was real. She knew at that point that things were going to get worse.
You're standing there in the doorway of the home I bought with my back and my credit, you thieving lying.
Cheryl cared for those children deeply, and she worried about them, and she worried about leaving them with him.
Like, we never wanted to leave our mom's house. We never wanted to go over and go see our father because we were afraid of him.
So the weekends we would spend over at his house. There was one time where I got very upset. I got in a fight with my brother, and it was your typical sibling bickering. But my father, he had a very short temper. He shoved me into the linen closet in his bedroom. He locked the door. I don't know how long I was in there, but it was dark when I went in. It was light when I came out. I know I had peed myself at least once. He would come by, he'd knock on the door, he'd yell. It was dark. I didn't know when I was getting out. I didn't know why I was in there. I didn't know what was happening.
It's always scary when he lost control. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed causing people pain.
Me and my brother both had parakeets, one blue, one yellow. Mine got sick, and I spent all day trying to nurse it back to health. I remember at the end of the day, I told him, "Dad, my bird's still sick. My bird is still sick. What do I do?" He grabbed my bird, and he squeezed it so hard the eyes popped out of its head.
And it wasn't enough for him to kill the bird in front of us. He made my sister cook the bird, and I had to eat it. And he thought it was funny. Like, whatever part of him he was missing, he felt complete by terrorizing us.
He was a monster. He had evil intent at every turn. I think his behavior just continued to escalate. Tom was not only manipulative, but he would watch her.
He would stand outside of that restraining order limit, and he would stand there and watch her just to let her know that he was watching her.
Cheryl, this is Tom. Don't ever presume to tell me where I'm supposed to be. There is no 100 yards. I'm on a public street, on a public sidewalk. You don't tell me what to do.
Some of the messages that I heard were just completely bone-chilling to me.
You don't tell me where to be. The next time you lie to the cops, like you have before, you're going to suffer the consequences.
My father, he was losing sense of control over my mother because she began building a life for herself. She cut ties from her abuser. She filed for divorce, and she became independent. So they were divorced, and he had a girlfriend. He was seeing Sue Beamer.
It was troubling. The first time I ever saw Sue, there was like some sort of resemblance to Cheryl in their stature. It was like replacing Cheryl in the relationship that he was in. So I definitely do not think that Tom was moving on. Tom manipulated Sue. I think Tom truly manipulated everyone that he ever came in contact with.
My mother didn't do a whole lot of dating. She took care of us. That was her world until she met Ross.
With Cheryl, everything was on the table. The first day we were together, She told me that she had 2 kids, and that was certainly the center of her life. She also told me she had a psycho stalker husband, and if I was going to run, I should run now. She was fun. She was very outgoing. She was a joy to be with, and it wasn't just me who noticed that. Everyone noticed what a joy Cheryl was.
Ross and my mother, they fell in love. He treated her so well. He was good to her.
The very first time I met her, I gave her a key to my place. This was before we were even dating. I just said, "You're someone who needs a safe place to go. Here's a key to my place. Use it whenever you want."
She was getting her life together. She was working 2 jobs. She was going to school to be an accountant. She was fixing the house so her and Ross could move and start a new life.
Our lives became intertwined to the point where life without her was something that was no longer something I could imagine. We planned our future together because our present was together, and our present was so wonderful.
Tom became aware that she was about to move on without him, and she was going to take me and my brother with her. We were about to have a completely different life separate of him, and he couldn't stand it.
Tom's abuse continued to get worse and worse the stronger that Cheryl got. The more she stepped away and set those boundaries, the more aggressive he got. Once the perpetrator starts seeing that victim get stronger and stronger, the crazier and the more volatile that person becomes.
My guess is that this was kind of the tipping point for him, knowing that she was with somebody who probably loved and adored her and treated her the way she deserved to be treated, probably just threw him into a downward spiral of evil.
He made blueberry pancakes and scrambled eggs. About an hour later, my head was foggy. Everything was spinning. At the time, I had no idea what was happening to me or why. So Tom gets on the phone, he calls my mother and convinces her that she needs to come pick me up because I'm sick. I'm crying, and he puts me on the phone with my mother, and I'm begging her to come get me. So we get off the phone, and Tom takes me and my brother, and we go in the car and we go for a drive. We ended up in a bar, and Tom got a phone call, and it was Sue. Tom got very angry. He was throwing his hands, he was yelling, he was angry, and he said, "I have to go do something, I'll be back."
They had been exchanging the children at the police station, but hearing her daughter crying and saying she was sick, she let her guard down and actually went to Tom's to get Shelby.
I know one of the things that Cheryl and I talked about was that she should never, ever go to his house.
She was fearful of Tom, and so obviously the child exchanges taking place at the police department was basically for her safety.
She got the call about Shelby being sick, and then Cheryl went over there. Cheryl went up to the apartment. When she was let into the apartment, Sue was there. Sue kind of looked like maybe you really shouldn't be here.
911. There's shooting over here.
Where's the guy that shot her at?
It was me.
It was you that shot her?
Yes, because he attacked me. There's shooting over here.
Where at?
In our apartment.
Who's been shot?
I think it was my boyfriend's ex-wife.
The 911 call comes into the Thornton Police Department, and that initiated the patrol response.
My boyfriend's ex-wife came in here and started yelling at me and screaming and grabbed a knife.
Why did you shoot her?
She came at me with a knife.
Susan, she made the 911 call. She was still on the phone with the dispatcher when the officers arrived. Other officers went into the apartment, found Cheryl's body, tried to administer life support with the assistance of paramedics, but she was obviously deceased. All we knew is that she had multiple gunshot wounds. We find multiple shell casings. Our CSI investigator was able to determine that Cheryl is running through the hallway where she shot twice in the back, and then she receives 2 more gunshot wounds, one to her upper chest and one to her thigh, and then there's a final gunshot wound which is in her head. The pathologist would tell us that the gunshot wound to the head could not have occurred as the first wound. Tom arrived at the scene with Sean and Shelby around 9 p.m.-ish. When Tom shows up, there's still a large police presence, police outside his door.
I had never seen so many red and blue lights in my life. There was a fire truck, there was an ambulance, there were cops everywhere. And we got stopped by an officer, and he explained that my mother was shot and Susan was in the apartment.
Tom never asked what was going on. When he was asked, what does he know about what's going on, he refused to answer any questions.
Tom showed absolutely no concern. None. There was no expression, no concern for who had been shot, why, if Susan was okay, if my mother was okay. There was no concern for anyone. Me and my brother were taken to the police station. The officers, they tried to make us comfortable. They gave us water and crayons and a notepad. I drew pictures on that notepad that I still have to this day. I wrote that I missed my mother. I think I knew what had happened, I just couldn't comprehend it.
It was difficult to contemplate or realize what had happened. You don't really understand life and death as a child.
I went into the police department, got briefed about what had happened, and then I'd realized that Shelby and Sean were there.
Kim told us that my mother was dead. Overnight, my entire life had been turned upside down.
My whole world kind of crashed in. It's a call that no one ever wants to hear. It was a shock. It knocked me down.
I felt like I saw Shelby kind of suddenly take on like a new role with her brother.
It was almost like she had to take on the role of Cheryl and be a protector.
I believe it was about midnight before I interviewed Susan. Susan stated that Cheryl came over, said that I wasn't the mother of the children, and I'll never be the mother. She pulled out a knife, and so I shot her. We obviously had a homicide. We had somebody who was confessing to it, and we had some physical evidence that showed that that person committed it. So that night, Susan Beamer was arrested and transported to jail on murder charges. I think there was always the sense that there was some involvement with Tom. It was just a matter of how much or, what role. We did talk to a neighbor. She saw Tom driving away in a hurry around 6 o'clock out of the apartment complex. Tom shows up at the police department and walks into the lobby. He said that I'm here for a child custody exchange. I want proof that I was here at the police department from 6 p.m. to 6:30. And the desk officer saw him arrive I want to say it was around 6:20, 6:25, and so the officer would only write the time that he saw Tom there. He wrote on the card 6:30. So we thought Tom was trying to account for more time at the police department than he was actually there. What we knew about Tom certainly made him a person of interest. So Tom was brought in to the police department. That night, we did photographs of him. Tom didn't make any statements at the apartment. Tom didn't make any statements at the police department. So we certainly didn't have enough probable cause or any probable cause at that point to believe that he had any involvement in this. I don't think anyone was happy about letting Tom leave with no charges that evening, but legally, we had no choice.
I missed my mother. I couldn't understand that she was dead. I didn't talk about it. I didn't say anything until one day I did.
August of '98 is when Shelby provided her interview, saying that she heard Tom and Susan talk, changed the investigation.
She was blown away. I mean, she just could not believe the words coming out of my mouth.
Well, I heard my dad get up, so I went out to investigate.
Okay.
And I heard my dad say, "Here, take this gun."
The night before she died, I was at Tom's apartment. And me and my brother, we were both sleeping. I remember Tom got out of bed.
Well, I heard my dad get up, so I went out to investigate.
Okay.
He had a gun in his hand. There was a little back and forth between the two of them.
And I heard my daddy say, "Here, take this gun and kill Cheryl."
Sue took the gun, and he told her he wanted to kill my mother, and the way he explained it to her is that they could get my mother out of the way and they could be together.
It was me. It was you that shot her?
Yes, because she attacked me.
Why did you shoot her?
She came at me with a knife.
The information we had from the 911 call and what the officers observed in the apartment didn't really match up. Susan didn't have any injuries, so self-defense obviously became questionable.
Of course, I thought it was Tom. They said it was actually Tom's girlfriend, which never made any sense to me.
By December of '98, Susan had now been in jail 4 to 5 months. With the permission and cooperation of her attorney, she wished to provide a statement. Her first statement is that there was no plan, but it was actually Tom who shot Cheryl. And right after Tom had shot and murdered Cheryl, hands her the gun and says, "Claim you did it, and if you don't, I'll kill your kids." I mean, she went from, "I did it in self-defense, Tom wasn't even here," to now, "Well, Tom did it, but I had no idea this was gonna happen." That makes a little more sense, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense. Susan made her second statement. She finally came clean. Her part in this was that she was to keep Cheryl in the apartment until Tom got there.
He took the clothes off that he had, and the kids were actually down in the car, just sitting in the car waiting for their dad to come back.
When Tom came in, he was wearing a different shirt, he had black gloves on, and that's when Cheryl saw Tom and began to run down the hallway. And then the next thing Susan says is that she hears gunshots, Cheryl landing in the back room, and then more series of gunshots. which matches up with where the shell casings were found, at least. That makes more sense. She was then willing to testify against Tom.
As far as Susan Beamer goes, she made the plan with my father to kill my mother. They made the plan to take my mother's life.
August of '98, complete unrelated allegation against Tom had been reported to the Thornton Police Department, not for the homicide, but for a sexual assault on a child. It was fortunate for us that he was arrested and incarcerated, so we knew where to find him. We served the arrest warrant while he was incarcerated. With most jury trials, it's very tense. I would say this was a little more than most. It was just, you could just feel the tension during each day of trial.
We certainly hope there would be some justice. You know, the person responsible would be held accountable.
The prosecutor lays out the case in a pretty chronological order. Susan does testify against Tom.
I remember the day that Shelby testified in court. She was such a little trooper, and to have to sit there and talk about that day, the day that her mom died, in front of her dad, who was, you know, just a short distance away. She was just so brave.
I remember being on the stand, and his lawyer approached me. His lawyer began by saying, "Can you tell me the difference between the truth and a lie?" And I told him one was real, the other was not. And I remember looking at my father in that orange jumpsuit.
I think as we began to get into the trial and really kind of unpack all of the years of abuse, I think it really shined a light that Cheryl was an incredibly strong person.
I do recall some phone messages that Cheryl had received, some kind of veiled threats. We knew who he was threatening and what he was threatening.
You and your boyfriend, your dad and your brother are cowards. I'm a man. I can tear them apart.
When the guilty verdict was announced, the judge gave immediate sentencing.
I was very relieved. I was very happy that finally this man who deserved no freedom, that he was put away for life.
I remember as we were walking out of the courtroom, Tom jumped up and he started yelling at Shelby.
What he actually said was, "I love you." And he was trying to convince me that he didn't do it and that it was all a lie. I remember having nightmares about that as a child. Just the look in his eyes and the anger. His hands were clenched. It took 4 officers to hold him back.
This isn't just a bad person. This is an evil person. It's a level of evil that, you know, I would hope most people never see in their lifetime.
I think if you define evil, I would say Tom Rogers fits that definition.
I think Tom being convicted obviously was a win, but it was just one chapter in a lifetime of healing for those children.
He was not free to hurt anyone. He was not free to do as he pleased. I did find solace in it, and I, to this day, believe that he's exactly where he belongs.
I look back now and think about the time I was with her as being a gift. I wish I'd had more time, but I am thankful for the time I did have.
I put together a scrapbook with a bunch of pictures of my mother. and me and my brother, and we still have that book to this day.
She would give everything for her family. I thank her every day, and I love her, and I always remember her with a smile on her face.
I remember her as being a strong, independent woman. I remember her as being a brave woman, and she taught me how to be brave. She never stopped fighting, and that's how I want to remember her. She was my hero.
It begins with a sound that should not exist at dawn in New York City, a phone ringing too long in a quiet apartment, unanswered, vibrating against a wooden table while the city outside exhales steam from manholes and the last streetlights flicker like tired witnesses, because by the time anyone forces that door open, the story has already decided it will never be simple, never clean, never finished. The year is 1992. The neighborhood is the kind people describe as ordinary, which is often code for places no one looks too closely at, places where routines are trusted more than facts. Inside the apartment, the air is stale, untouched, a coffee cup left half full, a coat draped over a chair as if its owner planned to be back in minutes. But the owner never returned. And just like that, a life slips into the category investigators hate most: missing, unexplained, unresolved. Her name will appear in the papers for a week, maybe two. A small photo, grainy, black and white. A caption that says last seen, followed by a date that will soon become heavier than anyone expects. Friends describe her as quiet, dependable, the kind of person who didn't disappear. Family members insist there is no reason, no history, no warning. The police note the lack of forced entry, the absence of blood, the normalcy of the scene that feels wrong precisely because it is normal. This is how cold cases are born. Not with screams, but with silence. Outside, the city moves on fast. Taxis honk. Radios blare headlines about politics, crime, recession. Somewhere downtown, another murder demands attention, another crime scene floods the system. Resources are finite. Leads dry up quickly. A neighbor remembers hearing footsteps on the stairs, or maybe it was the TV. A shop owner thinks he saw her that morning, or maybe it was the day before. Witness statements blur. Timelines stretch, then snap. Within weeks, the investigation slows. Within months, it stalls. By the end of the year, the file is thick with paper and thin on answers. The detectives assigned to the case don't call it hopeless, not out loud, but they feel it. No body. No suspect. No clear motive. Just a woman who left everything behind as if erased mid-sentence. They knock on doors. They interview coworkers who say she was normal, always normal. They check bank records, phone logs, subway cards. Nothing unusual. No sudden withdrawals. No frantic calls. No signs of escape. It's as if she walked into the city and the city swallowed her whole. Then come the theories. Voluntary disappearance. Stranger abduction. Secret lover. Wrong place, wrong time. Each theory sparks a brief flare of urgency, then dies. The case slips into a drawer, literally and figuratively. Another unsolved file in New York, another statistic in a city that measures tragedy by volume. The family keeps asking questions. The answers don't change. We don't know. We're still looking. We'll call if there's anything new. There never is. Years pass. The neighborhood changes. Stores close. New buildings rise. People who once knew her move away or forget details that once felt sharp. The missing woman becomes a story told in past tense, then not told at all. But cold cases don't disappear. They wait. They sit quietly, gathering dust, aging badly, holding secrets no one realizes they're keeping. By the late 90s, the case is officially labeled a cold case. The words sound clinical, but they carry weight. Cold means untouched. Cold means unanswered. Cold means the trail has gone dark. For the family, cold means something else entirely. It means birthdays without closure. Holidays with an empty chair. It means living in a permanent state of unfinished grief, suspended between hope and acceptance, unable to fully let go because there is nothing to let go of. Detectives rotate out. New officers skim the file, shake their heads, move on. Occasionally, a tip comes in. A psychic. An anonymous caller. A rumor overheard in a bar. Each one leads nowhere. Each one reopens the wound just enough to hurt again. The case remains frozen in 1992, preserved in paper and memory, untouched by time but eroded by it. And then, quietly, something changes. Not in 1992. Not in 1995. Not even in 2002. It changes years later, when technology catches up to questions the past couldn't answer. Databases grow. Old evidence gets new attention. Cold cases across the country begin to thaw, one by one, as DNA, data, and persistence do what time alone could not. Files are reopened. Names long forgotten are spoken again in interview rooms. This case is pulled from the archive not because of a dramatic confession or a sensational tip, but because someone notices something small. A detail overlooked. A relationship assumed to be simple. A family dynamic no one questioned because it seemed too ordinary to matter. Investigators start from the beginning, not chasing new theories, but interrogating old assumptions. They reread statements. They listen to taped interviews with fresh ears. They notice the pauses, the hesitations, the answers that were technically true but emotionally empty. The family is contacted again. Decades have passed. Voices sound older, heavier. Memories are less certain, but emotions remain raw. Investigators ask questions they didn't ask before. Not because they were incompetent back then, but because the questions didn't seem relevant. Now, they do. Family members exchange looks. Some answers come too quickly. Others come wrapped in anger, defensiveness, fatigue. The past, long buried, starts to shift. What investigators begin to sense is not a stranger lurking in the shadows, not a random act of violence, but something closer, quieter, more unsettling. A secret kept not out of malice, but out of fear. A truth buried not to hurt someone else, but to survive. The kind of secret families convince themselves is harmless as long as no one speaks it aloud. Paperwork leads to conversations. Conversations lead to contradictions. Timelines don't align the way they should. A phone call remembered differently. A visit that was never mentioned. A person who insists they were elsewhere, but cannot prove it. These are not smoking guns. They are whispers. But cold cases are solved on whispers as often as they are on screams. As investigators dig deeper, they realize the case was never really about disappearance. It was about what came before it. About relationships strained beneath the surface. About obligations mistaken for love. About choices made quietly, behind closed doors, that ripple outward in ways no one anticipates. The missing woman's life, once summarized in a paragraph, expands into something more complicated, more human, more tragic. The community, largely unaware that the case has been reopened, continues its daily rhythm. But inside police offices and private living rooms, the past is being reconstructed piece by piece. Each revelation adds weight. Each answer raises another question. The idea that this was a random tragedy begins to collapse under scrutiny. What replaces it is harder to face. Because if this disappearance was not random, if it was not the act of a stranger, then the danger was never outside. It was already inside the circle of trust. Inside the family dinners. Inside the phone calls that went unanswered. Inside the silence everyone agreed to keep. By the time investigators start to believe they understand what happened, they are no longer sure what justice would even look like. Years have passed. People have aged. Some have died. Evidence is incomplete. The law moves slower than memory, and memory is unreliable at best. The case is inching toward something that resembles resolution, but resolution does not mean relief. In New York, cold cases rarely end with clean conclusions. They end with compromises, with truths that arrive too late, with answers that cost more than anyone is prepared to pay. And as this investigation pushes forward, one thing becomes increasingly clear: whatever happened in 1992 did not end that year. It echoed forward, shaping lives, relationships, and silences for decades. The file is no longer cold, but it is not at peace. And as investigators prepare to confront the family with what they believe they've uncovered, the question lingers in the air, heavy and unavoidable. When the truth finally surfaces, will it bring closure, or will it simply replace one mystery with another, darker one, leaving everyone to wonder whether some secrets, once buried, were never meant to be found? The investigators don't announce progress. They never do with cases like this. Progress invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites mistakes. Instead, they work quietly, tracing old lines with new pressure, reopening conversations that were never meant to be reopened. In a city like New York, the past doesn't stay past for long once someone starts asking the wrong questions. Records are pulled. Names resurface. A pattern begins to emerge, not dramatic, not obvious, but persistent enough to refuse dismissal. They start with the family because that's where the file has always pointed without quite daring to accuse. Parents, siblings, extended relatives. Every interview from 1992 is laid out side by side, sentences compared, tone weighed. Back then, the answers sounded cooperative. Now, they sound rehearsed. Not identical, but aligned, as if everyone agreed on the shape of the story even if the details blurred. Investigators notice what isn't said as much as what is. Emotional gaps. Over-explained alibis. A shared insistence that nothing was wrong, even when subtle signs suggest otherwise. The missing woman had been living between two worlds in the months before she vanished. Outwardly stable. Privately strained. Financial records hint at quiet stress. Not desperation, but pressure. Phone logs show frequent calls to home, far more than usual, often late at night. Conversations that ended abruptly. No records of what was said, only the duration, sometimes stretching past midnight, sometimes cut short after a few minutes. Investigators wonder what kind of conversations pull an adult woman back into her childhood orbit so often, so urgently. They talk to former coworkers again. People who once shrugged and said she seemed fine now hesitate. Fine, they admit, but distracted. Tired. On edge. Someone remembers an argument overheard near the office payphones. Someone else recalls her asking about short-term leave, about disappearing for a while, phrased like a joke but delivered without humor. None of it was alarming enough to report in 1992. All of it feels heavier now. Attention turns to a specific weekend, one that barely registered in the original investigation. A family gathering. A birthday. A small celebration that produced no photos, no home videos, no souvenirs beyond memory. According to statements, she attended, stayed briefly, left early. No one remembered exactly when. No one remembered exactly why. Investigators circle that gap. Time, vague and slippery, is where cold cases hide their answers. When detectives re-interview family members about that weekend, the atmosphere shifts. Voices tighten. Stories diverge. One relative insists she never showed up. Another says she did, but barely spoke. A third remembers a heated discussion behind closed doors, though they can't recall the subject. These aren't dramatic contradictions. They're worse. They're small. Mundane. The kind of inconsistencies that suggest not lies, but coordination strained by time. The investigators don't accuse. They ask the same questions repeatedly, weeks apart, phrased differently. They watch reactions. They note who grows defensive and who grows quiet. Silence becomes its own kind of testimony. In one interview, a family member pauses too long before answering a question about the last phone call they shared. The pause is recorded. Replayed. Stretched. It doesn't prove anything. But it doesn't disappear either. Meanwhile, the physical evidence, what little exists, is re-examined. Items from the apartment are tested again. Fibers. Hair. Dust. The technology is better now, but the results are still thin. No clear signs of violence. No foreign DNA. The absence that once suggested a clean disappearance now feels deliberate. If something happened, it didn't happen there. Or it happened in a way designed to leave nothing behind. Investigators broaden their scope. They look at family vehicles registered at the time. Repair records. Mileage logs. Old parking tickets. Anything that suggests movement. One car stands out. Not because of evidence, but because of a gap. A period when the car's location can't be firmly placed. A routine oil change delayed by weeks. A receipt missing. It's circumstantial. It's fragile. But cold cases are built on fragile things. They map the city as it was in 1992. Construction sites. Abandoned lots. Waterfront access points long since redeveloped. Places where something could be hidden and never found. The city has erased many of its own scars. What was once empty land is now luxury housing. What was once accessible water is now fenced off. If a body was ever there, it may be unreachable now, sealed beneath concrete and progress. As the investigation tightens, the emotional cost rises. Family members sense the shift. Questions feel sharper. The tone less forgiving. Old wounds reopen. Accusations are implied without being spoken. Some relatives stop answering calls. Others demand lawyers. One breaks down during an interview, not in anger, but exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. That breakdown changes everything. It doesn't include a confession. It doesn't include details. It includes one sentence investigators can't ignore. A sentence about protecting someone. About doing what felt necessary at the time. The words are vague, immediately walk back, but they hang in the air long after the interview ends. Protecting who? From what? From whom? Investigators replay the audio again and again, dissecting tone, context, intent. They begin to suspect the case sits in a moral gray zone the law isn't designed to handle cleanly. Not a predator stalking a victim. Not a sudden act of rage. Something slower. Something born of obligation, fear, and a belief that silence was the lesser evil. A family decision, not unanimous, but enforced by circumstance. The missing woman's life is recontextualized. Her choices. Her hesitations. Her frequent contact with home. What once looked like closeness now looks like entanglement. Investigators theorize that she may have been trapped by a secret she didn't create but was expected to carry. A secret that threatened to surface. A secret that, once spoken, would have shattered more than one life. In this version of events, her disappearance is not an escape. It's an erasure. Not violent in the traditional sense, but final all the same. The absence of evidence becomes evidence of planning. Of people who knew her habits. Her trust. Her willingness to comply if convinced it was for the greater good. As the theory solidifies, so does the unease. Because proving this kind of crime is almost impossible decades later. Memories have faded. Physical proof is gone. Motives are subjective. The truth, if it exists, lives inside people who have spent years convincing themselves they did the right thing. The law demands clarity. This case offers none. Still, investigators push forward. They owe her that. They owe the version of her frozen in that black and white photo. They prepare to confront the family not with accusations, but with consequences. With the reality that silence, no matter how well-intentioned, has a cost. That protecting one person may have destroyed another. The city outside remains indifferent. It always is. But inside this investigation, the pressure builds toward an inevitable collision. A moment when someone will have to choose between preserving the story they've lived with for decades and facing a truth that will rewrite everything. And as that moment approaches, one question dominates every conversation, every late-night review of files and recordings. If this cold case is truly solved, if investigators are right about what happened in 1992, then the real shock won't be the crime itself. It will be the realization that everyone involved knew, in some way, all along, and chose silence instead. The decision to push harder is not unanimous. Cold cases have a way of dividing even seasoned investigators, splitting them between those who believe truth is still reachable and those who suspect it has decomposed beyond usefulness. But this team has crossed an invisible threshold. Too many inconsistencies. Too many emotional fractures. Too many signs that the story everyone agreed on in 1992 was less a memory than a pact. They begin reconstructing the days before the disappearance hour by hour, not relying on recollection, but on friction points. Utility usage in the apartment spikes one evening, then drops sharply. A voicemail left for a coworker is never returned. A subway entry is logged, but no corresponding exit. Small data points, insignificant alone, unsettling together. The city's systems, indifferent and mechanical, have preserved traces of a woman no one could. Investigators return to the apartment building, now renovated, cleaner, brighter, almost hostile to the idea that something went wrong there. New tenants know nothing. Old ones are harder to find. One former resident remembers her vaguely, a polite nod in the hallway, nothing more. Another recalls a raised voice on the stairs late one night, but shrugs it off, unsure whether the memory belongs to this building or another. Time corrupts memory like water corrodes metal. Attention shifts back to the family, but now the questions are sharper, less forgiving of ambiguity. Detectives ask about long-standing tensions, about money, about obligations that never made it into official statements. They ask about a relative whose name appears frequently in phone records but rarely in interviews. Someone who always seemed present, but never central. The kind of person families orbit without quite acknowledging. That name triggers reactions. A tightening of jaws. A sudden need to check watches. A request to pause the interview. One family member laughs nervously and says it's ridiculous. Another says nothing at all. Silence, again, does more talking than words ever could. Investigators note it carefully. They begin to suspect the family secret is not a single event, but a condition. Something ongoing. Something normalized. A situation everyone learned to manage quietly. The missing woman may not have been the center of it, but she may have been the pressure point. The one least willing to keep carrying it. The one whose disappearance made everything easier for those left behind, whether they admit it or not. This theory reframes everything. Her frequent calls home become negotiations. Her distracted demeanor becomes fatigue from maintaining appearances. Her talk of leaving, of taking time away, becomes a threat not of escape, but of exposure. If she left on her own terms, she might talk. If she talked, the secret would collapse. Investigators tread carefully here. Accusing a family of eliminating one of their own is a line that cannot be crossed lightly. They look for external confirmation. Medical records. Social services. Anything that hints at a hidden burden. They find fragments. Nothing conclusive. Enough to unsettle. Enough to suggest that the family's private reality was more complicated than the public one. One detective focuses on a single phrase repeated across multiple interviews, years apart. We thought it was handled. Handled how? By whom? When pressed, the answers slide sideways. It was dealt with. It was under control. It wasn't going to be a problem anymore. The language is vague, but the confidence behind it is not. These are not people guessing. These are people remembering. The investigation begins to feel less like a search for a perpetrator and more like an excavation of consent. Who agreed to what? Who knew enough to stay quiet? Who benefited most from the disappearance? The law is ill-equipped for this kind of moral labyrinth. There are crimes it can name and crimes it cannot. This one hovers uncomfortably between them. As pressure mounts, cracks widen. One family member agrees to a follow-up interview, alone this time. Without the others. Without the shared script. The tone shifts immediately. There is anger now. Regret. A bitterness that has had decades to ferment. The relative speaks of manipulation. Of being convinced that silence was necessary. Of being told that involving authorities would destroy lives. The missing woman's life is mentioned only briefly, almost as an afterthought, and that omission is telling. Investigators listen without interrupting. They let the anger spill. Somewhere in the flood of grievances, a detail emerges that wasn't in the file before. A late-night drive. A stop that made no sense at the time. An instruction not to ask questions. The relative insists they didn't know what was happening, only that it felt wrong. They say they've lived with that feeling ever since. That interview doesn't solve the case. It complicates it. It suggests a chain of involvement where no one person holds the entire truth. Each participant knows just enough to justify their own silence. Responsibility is distributed thinly, making it harder to grasp, harder to prosecute. Investigators map these partial truths against each other. Overlaps appear. So do gaps. The late-night drive matches the window when the missing woman's phone goes silent. The stop aligns with an area that, in 1992, was accessible, isolated, forgettable. Today, it's unrecognizable. The city has paved over the past with impressive efficiency. The question of a body resurfaces, unavoidable and unresolved. Without remains, the case remains vulnerable. Defense attorneys thrive on absence. No body, no crime. Investigators know this. They also know that bodies are not the only proof of death. Sometimes, disappearance itself, combined with context, is enough. Sometimes. The family begins to fracture under the weight of scrutiny. Old alliances shift. Accusations surface quietly, and whispers pass through lawyers and intermediaries. Someone leaks information to a reporter. A brief article appears, careful but suggestive, hinting that a long-dormant cold case may soon be reclassified. The community, long detached, stirs uneasily. For the family, the fear is no longer about being blamed. It's about being exposed. About the story they've lived with becoming public, stripped of nuance, flattened into headlines. About being judged not just for what they may have done, but for what they allowed to happen. Investigators feel the clock ticking. Not a legal deadline, but a human one. Witnesses are aging. Memories are fading. Opportunities are closing. They consider their options. Push for charges with what they have, risking acquittal. Or continue building, hoping for something more solid, something undeniable. The missing woman remains at the center of it all, paradoxically absent and omnipresent. Her voice is gone, but her choices echo through every interview, every argument, every sleepless night spent poring over files. She is no longer just a victim. She is a catalyst. The one person whose refusal, however quiet, forced everything into motion. As the investigation edges closer to a public reckoning, one unsettling realization takes hold among the detectives. If the family secret is exposed, if the truth of what happened in 1992 becomes official, it will not offer the clean satisfaction people expect from solved cases. There will be no singular villain. No dramatic arrest that restores balance. There will only be a collection of ordinary people, bound by fear and loyalty, who made a series of choices that felt survivable in the moment and monstrous in hindsight. And there will be a city forced to confront the idea that some disappearances are not accidents, not crimes of passion, but decisions made quietly, collaboratively, and with devastating permanence. The file sits open on the table, no longer cold, not yet closed. Outside, New York hums, oblivious. Inside, the past presses forward, demanding recognition. And as investigators prepare for the next step, they understand that whatever comes next will not just solve a case. It will unravel a family and expose the fragile line between protection and destruction that has kept the truth buried for far too long. By the time prosecutors are briefed, the room feels heavier than it should. Not with certainty, but with implication. They listen as investigators lay out timelines that don't quite line up, interviews that echo each other too closely, silences that feel engineered rather than accidental. No single piece of evidence commands the room. Instead, it's the accumulation that unsettles. The sense that something coherent is hiding just beneath the surface, refusing to fully reveal itself. The prosecutors ask the question everyone has been avoiding. What exactly are we charging here? Murder without a body is a hard sell. Conspiracy requires clarity of agreement. Obstruction depends on proving intent. The law demands edges. This case offers fog. Investigators admit as much. But they also insist that fog does not mean emptiness. It means concealment. They return to the family again, this time with subpoenas instead of requests. Bank records stretch back decades. Old insurance policies resurface. A life insurance policy taken out years before the disappearance, modest but notable, lists a beneficiary who insists it meant nothing, something every adult had, something forgotten. Investigators note the timing. The payments continued for a while after she vanished. Then they stopped. No claim was ever filed. Another detail that doesn't prove anything and yet refuses to be ignored. They look into medical histories. Confidential files are sealed tight, but patterns emerge through indirect sources. Prescriptions filled regularly, then abruptly ended. Appointments scheduled, then canceled indefinitely. The missing woman appears to have been managing something private, something that required routine and discretion. Whether it was her burden or someone else's is unclear. What is clear is that it placed her in a position of responsibility she did not choose. This reframes the family secret yet again. Investigators consider the possibility that her disappearance was rationalized as necessary. That someone convinced themselves it was kinder to erase her than to let her speak. That compassion and cruelty blurred until they were indistinguishable. This is not the language of killers as people imagine them. It is the language of people who believe they are preventing a greater harm. A former family friend is located after months of searching. They live out of state now, far from New York, far from the memories they never quite escaped. When contacted, they hesitate, then agree to talk. Their recollection is imperfect, but one moment stands out with unnatural clarity. A conversation shortly before the disappearance. The missing woman sounded frightened, not of someone outside the family, but of what would happen if she didn't keep her word. The friend remembers urging her to go to the police. She laughed, a brittle sound, and said it wasn't that simple. That phrase echoes through the investigation. Not that simple. Investigators hear it again and again, in different voices, across different interviews. It becomes a kind of refrain, a justification polished smooth by repetition. Nothing was simple. Everything was complicated. And so nothing was done. The timeline tightens. The weekend gathering looms larger. Investigators reconstructed using indirect proof. Grocery receipts. A parking ticket. A voicemail timestamped late at night. The missing woman was alive later than originally thought. She spoke to someone after she was supposedly last seen. That someone never mentioned the call. When confronted, they claim they forgot. Investigators don't believe them. Forgetting is plausible. Selective forgetting is not. The theory now suggests a confrontation. Not violent in the traditional sense. Emotional. Desperate. A conversation that escalated beyond intention. The missing woman may have been pressured to comply with a plan framed as temporary, necessary, reversible. She may have believed she was doing the right thing by agreeing. Or she may have realized too late that agreeing meant vanishing. What happens next is the hardest part to reconstruct. There are gaps no amount of questioning can fill. Investigators suspect transportation, a location chosen for obscurity, and a final act that left no witnesses. Whether she resisted, whether she consented, whether she understood the permanence of what was happening may never be known. The absence of physical evidence keeps these questions suspended, unanswerable. As the case edges closer to public exposure, the family's internal dynamics deteriorate. Lawyers replace conversations. Statements are vetted. Everyone becomes careful with words, even among themselves. The unity that once sustained the silence fractures under pressure. Blame begins to circulate quietly. Someone says they were misled. Someone else says they were coerced. Responsibility dissolves into a series of conditional statements, each one pushing guilt onto someone else. Investigators sense an opportunity. They focus on the weakest link, the person whose involvement appears reluctant rather than decisive. They present the evidence they have, carefully, methodically. They talk about consequences. Not just legal ones, but moral ones. About the weight of carrying this alone. About the possibility, however slim, of partial redemption through truth. The response is not immediate. Days pass. Weeks. Then a call comes in late one evening. The voice on the other end sounds older than it should, worn thin by years of restraint. They agree to meet, but only off the record at first. No recorders. No notes. Just a conversation. What they say doesn't solve the case. But it shatters the illusion that the family acted as a unified front. They describe confusion. Fear. A moment where they believed the missing woman would come back, that the arrangement was temporary. When it became clear she wouldn't, no one knew how to undo what had been set in motion. Silence hardened into policy. Denial into survival. Investigators leave that meeting knowing two things. First, that the truth is closer than it has ever been. Second, that the truth is uglier and more banal than anyone expected. There was no mastermind. No singular villain. Just a series of decisions made under pressure, each one narrowing the path back to honesty. The prosecutors remain cautious. Without remains, without a confession that includes specifics, the case is fragile. But public pressure is mounting. The leaked article has sparked interest. True crime forums begin dissecting the story. Armchair detectives speculate wildly. Some get close. Others veer into fantasy. The family becomes a subject of scrutiny, their past behavior reinterpreted through suspicion. For the investigators, the noise is a distraction. They focus on the core question that has haunted the case from the beginning. Why did no one stop it? Why did no one speak up? The answers they've found are uncomfortable because they are relatable. Loyalty. Fear. Love twisted into obligation. The belief that keeping quiet was an act of kindness. As the possibility of charges becomes real, the family faces a reckoning they postponed for decades. Old justifications crumble under the weight of consequences. Some express remorse privately, never publicly. Others cling to denial, insisting that reopening the case does more harm than good. The missing woman, they argue, has been gone too long. Let the past stay buried. But the past has a way of resurfacing, especially when it was never truly laid to rest. Investigators prepare their final push, knowing it may be their last chance to extract something concrete from a story built on absence. They understand that even if the case is declared solved, even if the headline reads the way people want it to read, resolution will be incomplete. Because solving this cold case will not restore what was lost. It will not untangle decades of guilt and silence. It will only illuminate a moment in 1992 when a family chose secrecy over truth, and a woman disappeared into that choice, leaving behind a void that no explanation can ever fully fill. The pressure reaches a point where silence is no longer neutral. It becomes an act. Prosecutors authorize a limited public statement, carefully worded, confirming that the 1992 disappearance is now the subject of an active investigation and that authorities believe they are close to determining what happened. No names are mentioned. No accusations are made. But the message is clear enough. The case is no longer dormant. Anyone still holding onto the truth is running out of places to hide it. The reaction is immediate. Reporters descend. Old neighbors are tracked down. Former co-workers are asked to remember things they buried decades ago. The family's privacy evaporates overnight. Every gesture, every past quote, every inconsistency is magnified. For some family members, the attention feels like punishment. For others, it feels like inevitability. What was contained for so long has finally broken its seal. Investigators take advantage of the momentum. They re-interview witnesses who previously declined to talk. Some still refuse. Others, now unshielded by the family's collective silence, are more willing. A distant relative admits they were told, years ago, not to ask questions. A friend confesses they suspected something was wrong but didn't want to interfere. These statements don't add new facts. They add texture. They show how far the silence extended, how many people sensed the truth without daring to name it. One detail begins to crystallize. The missing woman was not removed suddenly. She was gradually isolated. Responsibilities increased. Options narrowed. The family secret, whatever its precise nature, demanded constant management. She was reliable. Compliant. The kind of person who could be trusted to do what was asked, even when it hurt. That reliability may have sealed her fate. Investigators believe the final decision was framed as temporary. A break. A pause. Something that could be undone once tensions cooled. She may have been told to leave town, to stay quiet, to disappear for a while. Whether she agreed willingly or under pressure is impossible to determine. What matters is that the people involved believed they could control the outcome. They believed she would return. Or that if she didn't, they could live with that. The distinction matters legally, but emotionally it collapses. A temporary solution becomes permanent when no one intervenes. When days pass, then weeks, then years, and silence hardens into fact. The family's greatest mistake may not have been the initial act, but the decision to maintain it. Each year that passed without action deepened the crime, transforming hesitation into complicity. Prosecutors wrestle with strategy. They consider offering immunity to one participant in exchange for testimony. It's risky. It could fracture the case beyond repair. But without a witness willing to speak fully, the story remains incomplete. They identify the most likely candidate, the one whose involvement appears minimal, whose guilt seems rooted more in omission than commission. The one already showing cracks. An offer is made quietly. Conditional. Carefully scoped. It promises protection from certain charges, not absolution. In return, they want specifics. Dates. Locations. Names. Not feelings or justifications. Facts. The response is delayed. Days stretch. Investigators wait, aware that pressure cuts both ways. Too much, and the witness shuts down. Too little, and the opportunity slips away. While they wait, they revisit the physical geography one last time. Old maps are overlaid with new ones. They focus on the area identified in earlier interviews, the place connected to the late-night drive. In 1992, it was desolate. Industrial. Easy to access without being seen. Today, it's been transformed. Construction crews have reshaped the land. Layers of earth have been moved, compacted, sealed. Excavation would be expensive, disruptive, and likely inconclusive. Even if something is there, reaching it may be impossible. This reality forces a grim acceptance. The case may be solved without remains. Closure, if it comes, will be intellectual, not physical. The family will never have a body to bury. The city will never have a crime scene to point to. The truth will exist mostly in testimony and inference, fragile and contested. The call finally comes. The potential witness agrees to a formal interview, on the record. Lawyers are present. So are prosecutors. The room is small, windowless, designed to remove distractions. The witness looks older than their years, shoulders curved inward, as if bracing for impact. When they speak, it's halting at first, then steadier, as if something long restrained has found a path out. They confirm what investigators suspected. The plan was meant to be temporary. The missing woman was supposed to leave, to stay with someone outside the city, to keep quiet until the situation stabilized. The witness insists they believed this. That everyone believed this. They describe confusion when days passed without contact. Alarm when weeks followed. But by then, the story had been set. Admitting uncertainty would have unraveled everything. So they stayed silent. They stopped short of admitting intent to harm. They emphasized lack of control, lack of knowledge. Prosecutors pressed gently, then harder. Where was she taken? Who decided? Who knew it would be permanent? The answers are incomplete, but they point inward, toward the family. Toward decisions made collectively, without a single author. The interview lasts hours. When it ends, no one feels relief. There is confirmation, but not clarity. Enough to support a narrative. Not enough to eliminate doubt. Prosecutors step out to confer. Investigators sit in silence, absorbing the weight of what has been said. Decades of speculation have narrowed into a few hours of testimony, and still, the center remains hollow. News of the interview leaks within days. Headlines explode. The phrase family secret dominates coverage, stripped of nuance, inflated by conjecture. The public demands accountability. Some call for arrests. Others argue it's too late, that reopening old wounds serves no one. The family retreats further, some issuing statements through attorneys, others disappearing from view entirely. For the missing woman's memory, the attention is double-edged. Her name is spoken again, finally, but often as an object of scandal rather than a person. Her life is reduced to its ending. Investigators try to push back against this, reminding reporters that she was more than a victim, more than a problem to be managed. But the media machine has little patience for complexity. As prosecutors prepare to make a decision, they confront the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the case. Justice, as traditionally defined, may be unattainable. The law can punish actions, but it struggles with collective silence. It can name crimes, but it cannot easily name moral failure. Whatever charges are filed will feel insufficient to some and excessive to others. The family, fractured and exposed, faces its own reckoning. Relationships strain under the weight of blame and regret. Old arguments resurface with new intensity. Some members express remorse openly now, too late to matter legally, but necessary for their own survival. Others double down on denial, insisting the past cannot be judged by present standards. Through it all, the missing woman remains absent, her voice inferred but never heard. Investigators wonder what she would think of this moment, of the attention, of the partial truths finally emerging. Would she feel vindicated? Betrayed? Or simply tired, watching the world struggle to understand a decision she never wanted to make? As the case approaches its final phase, one reality becomes unavoidable. Solving this cold case will not end the story. It will only fix it in a particular shape, one version among many. The truth, such as it is, will always be incomplete, missing the one perspective that mattered most. And in that absence, the city is left with a conclusion that feels more like an echo. A recognition that in 1992, something irreversible happened, not in a moment of chaos, but in a series of calm, rationalized choices. Choices that seemed survivable at the time. Choices that, taken together, erased a woman from the city she called home, and left behind a silence that no amount of investigation can ever fully break. The prosecutors take longer than anyone expects. Days stretch into weeks, and the delay fuels speculation that something has gone wrong, that the case is collapsing under its own ambiguity. But inside the office, the hesitation isn't weakness. It's gravity. Every possible charge is weighed against the same problem, proof that convinces 12 strangers beyond a reasonable doubt. The testimony is compelling, but it is also careful, shaped by lawyers and memory and fear. It gestures toward truth without fully grasping it. They draft scenarios. In one, conspiracy charges move forward, framing the disappearance as a coordinated effort to remove a perceived threat. In another, obstruction and false statements form the backbone, punishing the silence rather than the act itself. Each option carries risk. Push too hard, and the case collapses in court. Push too softly, and it feels like a betrayal of the woman who vanished. Investigators sense momentum slipping. Witnesses who were willing to talk begin to retreat again, alarmed by media attention and the prospect of public testimony. The family's lawyers grow more aggressive, challenging timelines, questioning motives, suggesting that investigators are constructing a story to satisfy public appetite rather than evidence. It's a familiar tactic, and it works. Doubt creeps back in, quiet but persistent. To counter it, investigators return to the witness whose testimony cracked the case open. They ask for more. Not more emotion, but more specificity. They ask about routes taken that night. About landmarks. About smells, sounds, anything sensory that might anchor memory to place. The witness struggles, frustrated by their own uncertainty. Decades have softened edges. Streets have changed names. Buildings are gone. The city has overwritten the past. Still, fragments emerge. A bridge crossed. A turn taken too early. A stretch of road that felt endless. Investigators plot these fragments on old maps, triangulating possibilities. One location stands out again, not because it's certain, but because it fits too well. It sits at the intersection of convenience and obscurity. It would have been accessible in 1992. It would have been easy to rationalize. It would have been easy to forget. They request permission to search the area using modern techniques. Ground-penetrating radar. Soil analysis. The request triggers legal resistance. Property owners object. The city hesitates. The cost is high. The likelihood of success is uncertain. Prosecutors weigh the optics. Authorizing a search that yields nothing could undermine the entire case. But not searching feels like surrender. In the end, a limited search is approved. Quiet. Unannounced. Conducted at dawn to minimize attention. Investigators stand at the perimeter, watching machines roll across land that has been reshaped countless times since 1992. Each pass of the radar sends a pulse into the ground, searching for disturbances that might signal human remains. The readings are inconclusive. There are anomalies, but nothing definitive. Soil has been moved too often. Layers overlap. The earth has learned to keep its secrets. The search ends without ceremony. No press conference. No announcement. Just a line added to the file. Area examined. No remains located. It's not a failure, but it feels like one. The absence of a body continues to dominate the case, casting a shadow over every decision. Meanwhile, the family's internal conflict intensifies. One member, previously silent, breaks ranks publicly, issuing a statement that stops just short of accusation. They speak of regret. Of carrying guilt. Of wishing things had been handled differently. The statement is careful, lawyered, but it cracks the facade of unity that protected the secret for decades. Other family members respond angrily, denying implications, accusing betrayal. The fracture is now visible to everyone. Investigators see an opening. They reapproach individuals who have stayed quiet, emphasizing the shifting dynamics. Silence no longer guarantees protection. In fact, it may now guarantee blame. Some listen. Some don't. One agrees to a proffer session, a limited conversation that could lead to cooperation. It's a calculated gamble. The person knows enough to be dangerous, but not enough to fully illuminate the truth. The session is tense. The witness is defensive, suspicious, keenly aware of the stakes. They confirm pieces of the existing narrative while distancing themselves from its worst implications. Yes, there was a plan. Yes, it involved leaving the city. No, they didn't believe it would be permanent. No, they never saw her again. The answers are consistent, but consistency doesn't equal completeness. Prosecutors push on motive. Why her? Why was she the solution? The witness hesitates, then speaks in generalities. Because she was responsible. Because she wouldn't say no. Because she loved the family. The words land hard. Love, reframed as vulnerability. Responsibility, reframed as leverage. The missing woman's defining traits are recast as liabilities that made her expendable. That realization shifts the tone of the investigation. This is no longer about a single bad decision. It's about a system within a family that rewarded compliance and punished resistance. The disappearance becomes the extreme endpoint of a pattern, not an anomaly. Investigators begin to see the case not as a mystery of violence, but as a study in power exercised quietly, without witnesses. Public opinion begins to polarize. Some see the family as monsters, capable of the unthinkable. Others see them as tragic figures, trapped by circumstances, making impossible choices. The debate is loud, emotional, often cruel. The missing woman's humanity is lost in the noise, reduced to a symbol for arguments about blame and forgiveness. Inside the prosecutor's office, a decision finally takes shape. They will move forward, but narrowly. Charges are prepared against select individuals for conspiracy and obstruction, focusing on actions taken after the disappearance rather than speculating about the exact moment of death. It's not everything investigators hoped for. But it's something the law can sustain. When the charges are announced, the city reacts as expected. Shock. Outrage. Skepticism. Headlines declare the cold case solved, even as the fine print reveals how much remains unknown. The word solved becomes a point of contention, criticized by some, defended by others. For investigators, it feels premature. Solved implies completeness. This case offers none. Arraignments follow. Courtrooms fill with cameras. Defendants appear older, diminished by time and stress. Pleas are entered. Not guilty. Innocent. Misunderstood. Lawyers speak confidently. Families sit in silence, divided by aisles and history. The missing woman's name is spoken formally, repeatedly, as if repetition might conjure her presence. Behind the scenes, negotiations begin. Plea deals are discussed. Reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. The possibility of a fuller account tempts prosecutors, but trust is fragile. Every offer risks being exploited. Every concession risks public backlash. The balance between truth and accountability becomes increasingly delicate. Investigators watch from the margins as the case transitions from inquiry to litigation. Their role diminishes. Control shifts to attorneys and judges and procedural rules. The narrative they painstakingly assembled is now subject to cross-examination, reframed by adversarial logic. Details that felt meaningful are challenged as speculation. Gaps are emphasized. Certainty erodes under scrutiny. Still, something irreversible has happened. The silence is broken. The family secret is no longer confined to whispers and memory. It exists in transcripts, filings, sworn statements. The disappearance has been acknowledged not as an accident, not as a mystery of fate, but as the outcome of human choices. For the investigators, that acknowledgement is both victory and defeat. They have pushed the truth into the light, but the light reveals how much remains obscured. They know the case will never yield a clean ending. No dramatic confession. No recovered remains. No moment where everything clicks into place. As the legal process grinds forward, the city resumes its rhythm. New crimes replace old ones in the headlines. Public attention drifts. But for those involved, time has not resumed. It has split. There's before the charges and after. Before the silence broke and after it could no longer hold. The missing woman remains absent, still unlocated, still undefined by the law's conclusions. But something about her story has changed. She is no longer just someone who vanished. She is someone who was decided upon. Weighed. managed, and ultimately removed from the narrative of a family that believed it was protecting itself. That understanding settles heavily over the case as it moves toward its uncertain conclusion. The cold case may be labeled solved, but its core remains unresolved, pulsing beneath legal language and public judgment. A reminder that some truths surface not to heal, but to haunt, and that solving a case does not always mean ending the pain, it sometimes only gives it a name. The courtroom becomes the new arena, but it is an ill-fitting one. Cold cases don't adapt well to fluorescent lights and rigid schedules. They resist the tidy logic of motions and objections. What happened in 1992 lives in memory and inference, not in exhibits that can be passed to a jury. Still, the process advances, indifferent to discomfort. Pretrial hearings strip the story down to its bones. Prosecutors argue that the disappearance was the foreseeable outcome of coordinated actions and sustained deception. Defense attorneys counter with uncertainty, with the absence of a body, with the danger of confusing moral failure with criminal intent. They repeat the same phrase until it dulls the room. Tragic does not mean illegal. Tragic does not mean illegal. The words echo, sharp and hollow. Witnesses are prepped behind closed doors. Some are eager, fueled by a need to finally speak. Others are brittle, frightened of what testimony will cost them. The witness who first broke the silence begins to waver. Public scrutiny has a way of hardening regret into fear. Every statement is dissected online. Every hesitation is labeled a lie. The past they hoped to unburden themselves of now feels heavier than ever. Investigators watch this shift with concern. They know how fragile cooperation can be once the stakes become real. They meet with prosecutors, urging caution, urging patience. Push too hard, and witnesses retreat entirely. Ease off, and the defense will seize the vacuum. It's a narrow path, and the ground is unstable. As jury selection approaches, the city's appetite for the story resurges. Documentaries are announced. Podcasts dissect timelines with clinical obsession. Amateur sleuths map theories across social media, filling gaps with speculation presented as certainty. Some theories are close. Others are grotesquely wrong. All of them erase nuance in favor of drama. The missing woman becomes a character, not a person. Her family, once unified in silence, now fractures publicly. One member refuses to attend hearings. Another sits rigidly in the gallery, eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the defendants. A third gives a brief interview, speaking of sorrow and confusion, carefully avoiding responsibility. Each appearance adds another layer of interpretation, another version of events competing for dominance. Behind the scenes, plea negotiations intensify. Prosecutors offer reduced charges in exchange for fuller testimony. Defense attorneys advise caution, reminding their clients that memory is fallible and truth is dangerous. Some defendants consider cooperation seriously for the first time. Others reject it outright, convinced that ambiguity is their strongest shield. The lack of remain still looms large. It is the defense's anchor, heavy and reliable. One defendant, previously resolute, begins to unravel. Age has softened their defiance. They speak privately with their attorney about exhaustion, about wanting this to end. They ask what happens if they tell everything they know. The answer is unsatisfying. No guarantees. Only the possibility of leniency and the certainty of consequences. Truth is not a currency the system values consistently. That defendant requests a meeting. Prosecutors agree, cautiously. The conversation is halting, emotional, punctuated by long silences. They speak of fear. Of being young in 1992, overwhelmed, deferring to older voices. They admit they suspected the disappearance would be permanent sooner than they let on. They admit they did nothing. They don't know where the missing woman is. Or they say they don't. The line between ignorance and denial blurs. The prosecutors press for specifics again. Locations. Names. Orders given and followed. The answers are partial, but they corroborate earlier testimony in troubling ways. The narrative tightens, not into clarity, but into coherence. A shape forms where once there was fog. It is still indistinct, but it is undeniably there. This cooperation strengthens the prosecution's hand, but it also introduces new risks. Defense teams prepare to attack credibility, painting cooperators as opportunists willing to say anything to save themselves. They will emphasize inconsistencies, memory gaps, emotional language. They will argue that the state's case rests on stories, not facts. The judge issues rulings that narrow the scope of testimony. Some evidence is excluded. Some language is restricted. The word murder is used sparingly, if at all. The legal framing grows more cautious as trial approaches, as if everyone involved senses how easily this could collapse. The missing woman's absence becomes a presence in the courtroom. Her photograph is admitted into evidence, enlarged, projected for the jury. It is the same image used in early missing person flyers. She looks young, composed, unaware of how her face would be studied decades later. Jurors look at the photograph longer than they look at anything else. It anchors the abstractions, reminding them this is not just an argument about law, but about a person erased. Opening statements loom, and with them, the risk of overreach. Prosecutors rehearse carefully, choosing words that suggest inevitability without asserting certainty they cannot prove. Defense attorneys plan to dismantle that suggestion piece by piece. The trial will not hinge on one dramatic moment. It will hinge on endurance. On which story feels more plausible after weeks of repetition. Outside the courthouse, the public's patience begins to thin. Some accuse prosecutors of dragging the case out. Others accuse them of rushing it. The contradiction is lost in the noise. What people want is closure, a word that circulates freely but means different things to different people. For some, closure means punishment. For others, it means explanation. For a few, it means forgetting. Investigators, now mostly sidelined, grapple with a sense of loss. This case has consumed years of their lives. They know its contours intimately. Watching it filtered through legal strategy feels like watching a familiar landscape flattened into a map. Necessary, perhaps, but painful. They meet occasionally, unofficially, sharing updates, speculating about outcomes. They talk about the missing woman more than anyone else does. About who she was before the case consumed her identity. About whether she would recognize herself in the narrative now attached to her name. They know she will never testify. Her truth will always be inferred, reconstructed, argued over by others. As trial begins, the courtroom settles into a rhythm. Witnesses take the stand. Old memories are summoned, examined, challenged. Some crumble under cross-examination. Others hold, stubborn and imperfect. Jurors listen, taking notes, their expressions carefully neutral. The judge intervenes when tempers flare. The process grinds forward, slow and relentless. The most damaging testimony does not come from any single witness. It comes from accumulation. From hearing the same patterns repeated by different voices. The same rationalizations. The same phrases. It creates an impression that is difficult to dismiss. Not proof of a single act, but proof of a shared mindset. Defense attorneys fight this with equal persistence. They highlight every discrepancy. They remind the jury of the decades that have passed. They question motives. They suggest that grief has been reshaped into accusation, that guilt has been projected where certainty is impossible. They return, again and again, to the absence of remains. No body, no proof of death. No proof of death, no murder. The jury absorbs it all, trapped between empathy and skepticism. Between the desire to believe the worst and the responsibility to doubt it. The missing woman's photograph watches silently from the screen, unchanged, unanswering. As the trial progresses, one truth becomes inescapable. Whatever verdict is reached, it will not resolve the underlying question that has haunted this case from the beginning. Not where she is. Not exactly what happened. But why so many people found it easier to let her disappear than to confront the secret she carried. That question lingers in the courtroom air, unspoken but heavy, shaping every testimony and every objection. It is the question no verdict can fully answer. And as the proceedings inch toward their conclusion, it becomes clear that the cold case has not transformed into a simple story of guilt or innocence. It has become something else entirely. A public reckoning with silence. A demonstration of how ordinary people, under sustained pressure, can convince themselves that doing nothing is the same as doing right. And a reminder that some disappearances are not crimes of chaos, but of consensus, formed quietly, sustained patiently, and revealed only when time itself begins to demand payment. The years don't pass quietly in a city like New York. They grind. They scrape. They leave marks on brick and bone alike. By the time this cold case slips into its second decade, the streets where it began barely resemble themselves, storefronts replaced, faces changed, entire blocks reborn under new names. Yet the absence at the center of the story remains stubbornly intact, like a missing tooth you can't stop touching with your tongue, and every anniversary brings the same ritual back into the light. A small notice in the paper, a brief mention on local radio, another unanswered question carried by the wind. Between buildings that have learned how to forget everything except this. Detectives rotate out, retire, transfer, burn out, and the case file grows heavier without getting any clearer, pages yellowing, evidence bags sealed so long the plastic turns cloudy. And when a new investigator finally cracks it open again, it feels less like starting an investigation and more like opening a time capsule that smells faintly of dust, stale coffee, and disappointment. He reads the same statements, the same contradictions, the same half-truths, and he realizes quickly that the problem isn't a lack of information, it's an excess of it, too many stories stacked on top of each other, each one canceling out the next, each one just plausible enough to keep hope alive and just flimsy enough to collapse under pressure. The victim's name still echoes in the file, typed and retyped across decades of paperwork, a person reduced to a series of facts: height, weight, last known address, last known outfit, last known phone call, and yet everyone who ever knew them insists that the most important details never made it onto the page: the way they laughed too loudly, the way they trusted too easily, the way they seemed distracted in those final weeks, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Friends recall odd behavior, missed appointments, sudden changes in routine, but memory is a slippery witness. And by now every recollection has been replayed so many times it's hard to tell where truth ends and imagination begins. A new tip comes in one winter afternoon, decades late and already apologetic, a voice on the phone trembling with the weight of time, someone who claims they heard something back then, something they didn't understand until years later, something about a fight, a threat, a name whispered in anger, and the detective listens without interrupting, scribbling notes he knows will be added to the pile. Not the solution, but he also knows this is how cold cases move now, not with dramatic breakthroughs but with small, human confessions that arrive long after the moment has passed, when fear has softened into regret. The tip leads nowhere concrete, just another circle drawn around the same cluster of familiar names, people who were already questioned, already cleared, already buried under layers of alibis and technicalities. And still, something about it nags, because it points not to a stranger lurking in the dark but to the idea that the danger was close, intimate, woven into the victim's daily life so tightly that it looked like safety. Investigators have learned to fear that possibility more than any shadowy outsider, because it means the truth may have been hiding in plain sight the entire time, protected by normalcy, routine, and the collective unwillingness to imagine that the worst could come from someone known. As the city changes, technology creeps forward, and the case is digitized, scanned into databases, cross-referenced with new tools that promise to see patterns human eyes missed. But the algorithms return the same silence the streets always have. DNA is tested and retested, fibers reanalyzed, but evidence degraded by time refuses to speak clearly, offering only fragments, probabilities, maybes. And the cruel irony is that science has advanced just enough to tease answers without delivering them, like a locked door with the key visible through frosted glass. The family watches all of this from a distance that feels both protective and isolating. They've learned the language of investigators, learned what phrases mean progress and which ones are polite ways of saying nothing has changed. Still active, open investigation, following new leads, words that sound hopeful until you've heard them for 20 years. Some family members cling to the belief that resolution will come suddenly, dramatically, a confession on a deathbed, a forgotten piece of evidence discovered during a renovation, while others quietly prepare themselves for the possibility that closure may never arrive, that the story will simply stop mid-sentence and remain that way forever. Media interest flares and fades like a faulty neon sign. Every few years, a journalist stumbles onto the file, drawn by its unresolved nature, and for a brief moment the case is everywhere again, headlines screaming cold case mystery, new questions emerge, family still waiting, and then the news cycle moves on, pulled by fresher tragedies, leaving behind the same old ache. Each resurgence raises hopes and then dashes them, and some relatives stop answering calls altogether, unwilling to reopen wounds for stories that end exactly where they began. The neighborhood remembers in its own fractured way. Older residents point out corners where they stood when the news broke, bars where people argued late into the night about what really happened, stoops where rumors spread faster than facts, and younger residents listen with a kind of detached curiosity, the case feeling more like urban legend than lived reality. Yet even they feel it sometimes, walking home late, sensing the echo of something unresolved in the air, because cities absorb stories like this and exhale them slowly, shaping the way people move, think, and fear. One retired detective admits years later that the case still visits him in dreams, not as a coherent narrative but as flashes, a door half open, a ringing phone never answered, a face turning away at the wrong moment. And he wakes with the same frustration he felt on the job, the sense that he was always one step behind, always reacting instead of arriving in time. He wonders if he missed something obvious, a detail dismissed too quickly, a witness not pressed hard enough, and this is the quiet torture of unsolved cases. They don't end when the paperwork is filed, they linger, reshaping the lives of everyone who touched them. By the late 2000s, the case is officially labeled a cold case, a term that sounds clinical but feels cruel to those still waiting, because nothing about it feels cold to them. It burns just as fiercely as it did on the first day. A specialized unit reviews it, methodical, detached, professionals trained to see patterns across decades, and they approach it like archaeologists, carefully brushing away layers of assumption to see what's actually there. They identify inconsistencies no one noticed before, timelines that don't quite align, statements that subtly changed over time, and for a brief, electric moment, it feels like something might finally give. But each potential breakthrough dissolves under scrutiny, explanations emerging that are just strong enough to hold, and the investigators are left with a familiar feeling, the sense of standing in a room full of doors that all lead back to the same place. They can explain how the case stalled, how mistakes were made, how resources were stretched thin, but explaining why it happened, who did it, and what truly occurred in those lost hours remains beyond reach. And still, the story refuses to die. It's retold at dinner tables, in late-night conversations, on anonymous internet forums where amateur sleuths dissect every detail with obsessive care, convinced that official investigators overlooked something obvious. Some theories are wild, others chillingly plausible, and all of them share the same flaw: none can be proven. The case becomes a mirror, reflecting whatever fear, suspicion, or fascination the viewer brings to it, and in that way it evolves, not toward resolution, but toward myth. As another decade closes, the file remains open, heavier now with history than with evidence, and the absence at its center feels almost tangible, a presence defined entirely by what isn't there. The city keeps moving, traffic roaring past the places where the story began, people hurrying by unaware that beneath their feet lies a question that has never been answered, and somewhere in that constant motion, the cold case waits, patient and unyielding, for someone, someday, to finally see what everyone else has missed, or to accept that some stories, no matter how loudly they demand an ending, are destined to remain unfinished. Time has a way of rearranging priorities, but it never loosens its grip on unresolved violence. As the case edges toward its third decade, the word cold starts to feel misleading, because nothing about it has cooled, it has only hardened, calcified into something sharp and enduring, a shard lodged deep in the collective memory of the city. New York has learned to live with unanswered questions, but this one still flares up unexpectedly, in quiet precinct offices and family kitchens, in the private thoughts of people who once crossed paths with the victim and never quite escaped the feeling that they were brushing against something dangerous without knowing it. A quiet shift happens when a younger generation of investigators takes another look, detectives who weren't even in the academy when the crime occurred, who approach the file without the emotional exhaustion of repeated failure. They don't remember the press frenzy, the political pressure, the frantic early days. They only see patterns and gaps, and sometimes that distance feels like an advantage. They notice how certain names appear again and again, not loudly, not suspiciously, but consistently, orbiting the case like small moons, never quite colliding with the truth but never drifting away either. One name in particular begins to stand out, not because of new evidence but because of timing. A person who was present at key moments, who offered help readily, who seemed eager to cooperate, maybe too eager, and who then quietly faded from the narrative as attention shifted elsewhere. Back then, investigators dismissed the oddities as personality quirks, nerves, the understandable anxiety of someone caught near a tragedy, but decades later those same details look different, sharpened by hindsight, and the detectives start pulling threads that were never fully tugged before. They re-interview witnesses who thought they were done with this part of their lives, people now older, slower, more reflective, and the conversations feel different than they did years ago. There's less bravado, less certainty, more hesitation, more admissions of what they didn't say back then, what they assumed wasn't important, what they were afraid to mention. Memory hasn't improved, but honesty has, eroded into shape by time and guilt, and even when the facts don't change, the tone does, shifting subtly towards something darker. One witness recalls a conversation overheard by accident, a raised voice behind a closed door, a phrase that felt wrong even then but seemed too vague to matter. Another admits they lied about a minor detail, not to protect anyone in particular, just to avoid being pulled deeper into something that already felt dangerous. None of it is explosive on its own, but together it creates a low hum of unease, the sense that the case didn't stall because there was nothing to find, but because what was there made people uncomfortable. The family senses the shift before it's officially acknowledged. Investigators start calling more frequently, asking more pointed questions, requesting access to old letters, photographs, personal effects that have been stored away like fragile relics. Each request carries a double edge, hope sharpened by dread, because any real movement toward the truth means reopening wounds that never truly healed. Still, they comply, because doing nothing has proven unbearable, and if pain is the price of answers, they are willing to pay it. Behind closed doors, detectives begin mapping relationships rather than events, focusing less on what happened and more on who knew whom, who trusted whom, who had leverage over whom. The picture that emerges is messy, intimate, tangled, a web of obligations and secrets that feels more like a family drama than a random act of violence. This is where cold cases often turn, away from alleyways and unknown assailants, toward kitchens, living rooms, whispered arguments, and the dangerous assumption that familiarity equals safety. A long-forgotten financial record surfaces, not damning, not definitive, but strange enough to warrant attention. Money moved quietly, explanations offered that don't quite line up with known circumstances. Investigators can't prove it's connected, but they can't ignore it either, because money has a way of exposing motivations people refuse to articulate. The numbers suggest pressure, dependency, a relationship that wasn't as equal as it appeared, and suddenly the emotional landscape of the case begins to tilt. Then comes the document that changes the tone of everything, an old piece of correspondence, misfiled, overlooked, or simply misunderstood at the time, now reread with fresh eyes. It isn't a confession, it isn't a threat, it's something more insidious, a hint of knowledge the writer shouldn't have had, a casual reference to a detail that wasn't public, wasn't widely shared, wasn't supposed to be known outside a very small circle. It's the kind of detail that doesn't scream guilt but whispers familiarity, and that whisper echoes loudly in a room full of investigators trained to listen for exactly that. The suspect is approached carefully, decades after the fact, life lived, reputation built, scars accumulated in places no one else can see. They are polite, cooperative, almost relieved to talk, as if the knock on the door has been expected for years. They answer questions calmly, their story polished by time, consistent in its broad strokes, but when detectives press on specifics, the cracks begin to show, small pauses, slight changes in wording. Moments where the narrative slips just enough to reveal uncertainty beneath. There is no dramatic confrontation, no sudden breakdown, just a growing sense that the room is filling with something heavy and unspoken. The suspect insists they loved the victim, insists they would never cause harm, and investigators believe that might even be true, because love and violence are not opposites, they often coexist in the same fragile space. What matters is not what the suspect claims to feel, but what they were capable of when pushed, when cornered, when faced with the possibility of losing control. For the first time in years, the case feels close, not solved, but narrowed, focused, and that focus brings with it a terrifying clarity. Investigators begin to suspect that the reason the case endured wasn't because the perpetrator was brilliant or elusive, but because the truth was too ordinary, too painful, too close to home for anyone to want to see it clearly. A secret doesn't have to be complex to survive, it just has to be shared by enough people who all benefit from keeping it buried. Legal hurdles loom large. Evidence is circumstantial, memories unreliable, physical proof degraded beyond certainty. Prosecutors are cautious, aware that moving too soon could collapse everything, that a failed case would not only deny justice but cement the mystery permanently. So the investigation advances slowly, deliberately, every step weighed against the risk of losing what little momentum has been gained. Outside the precinct, rumors begin to stir again. Whispers of a family secret, of betrayal hidden behind loyalty, of a truth so destabilizing it could fracture what remains of the victim's world. The media catches wind, headlines reappear, speculation blooms, and once more the city leans in, drawn by the familiar allure of a cold case that might finally be warming. But inside, among those closest to the file, excitement is tempered by fear. Because solving the case won't just mean identifying who did it, it will mean confronting why so many people, for so long, looked away. It will mean acknowledging that justice didn't fail because it was impossible, but because it was inconvenient, because it demanded a reckoning no one was ready to face. As the investigation inches forward, the weight of that potential truth presses down on everyone involved. The family braces for answers they've waited decades to hear, unsure whether they will bring relief or simply a new kind of grief. Investigators work late into the night, driven not by headlines or accolades but by the quiet understanding that this may be their last chance to get it right. And somewhere in the city, beneath layers of time and denial, the cold case tightens its grip, no longer content to linger as an unsolved mystery, pushing instead toward a revelation that promises to change everything, even if it comes too late to undo the damage already done. The pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates, slowly, like water behind a dam that everyone knows is cracked but no one wants to admit might give way. Inside the investigation room, the air feels heavier now, not with certainty, but with proximity. The truth is no longer abstract. It has edges. It has names attached to it. And that makes every decision dangerous. One wrong move, one premature leak, and decades of fragile progress could collapse back into silence. Detectives begin working the case in parallel tracks, one focused on what can be proven, the other on what can be understood. The first is brutal in its limitations. Physical evidence offers nothing new. Forensics can suggest, imply, narrow, but never confirm. The second track, the human one, is where the tension lives. They reconstruct relationships down to the smallest gestures, who called whom late at night, who showed up unannounced, who knew details they shouldn't have known. They study photographs not for what's visible, but for what's missing, who is always present just outside the frame, whose absence feels intentional rather than coincidental. The suspected family secret begins to take shape, not as a single explosive revelation, but as a pattern of quiet accommodations. Favors granted without explanation. Questions not asked because the answers might be unbearable. A collective agreement, unspoken but enforced, that some things were better left alone. Investigators recognize this pattern immediately. They've seen it before in other cases, other families, other communities. Silence doesn't always come from fear of punishment. Sometimes it comes from fear of destruction, the knowledge that telling the truth might shatter what little remains intact. One detective notices something unsettling in the timeline, a gap not in hours or days, but in reactions. When the disappearance first became public, most people responded with urgency, panic, confusion. But one small circle reacted with a strange calm, almost resignation, as if the outcome had already been accepted. At the time, it was chalked up to shock, to grief manifesting in different ways. Now, it reads differently, like the behavior of people who knew more than they were saying, or at least suspected something they didn't want confirmed. They return to old interview tapes, digitized now, voices crackling through outdated equipment, and they listen not for answers but for emotion. Hesitations. Deflections. Moments where a witness fills silence with unnecessary detail. In one recording, a relative speaks passionately about love and loyalty, but when asked a simple factual question, their voice drops, words slow, as if navigating a minefield. It's subtle. It's deniable. But it's there, and once seen, it can't be unseen. The suspect is brought in again, this time under a different pretext, casual, low pressure, a conversation rather than an interrogation. The detectives don't accuse. They reminisce. They talk about the city in the early 90s, about how different everything felt, about how people handled problems back then. The suspect relaxes at first, nostalgia softening their defenses, and then, almost imperceptibly, they overreach, offering a detail that doesn't match the official record, correcting a timeline they weren't supposed to know needed correcting. It's a small slip. The kind defense attorneys love to dismiss as coincidence. But to investigators, it's a flare shot into the dark. They press gently, circling back, asking the same question in different ways, and each time the answer shifts just enough to suggest that the truth isn't fixed, it's being actively maintained. The suspect remains composed, but the effort shows. This is not someone recalling events. This is someone managing them. Outside the room, legal counsel debates the next move. There is still no smoking gun, no single piece of evidence that can carry a case to trial on its own. Everything relies on accumulation, on convincing a jury that the pattern itself is the proof. It's risky. Cold cases die this way all the time, crushed under the weight of reasonable doubt. But waiting has its own risks. Witnesses are aging. Memories are fading. Time is not neutral. It favors the person who wants nothing to change. The family is informed, cautiously, that the investigation has reached a critical stage. They're told to prepare themselves, not for resolution, but for clarity. Those words land hard. Clarity doesn't promise justice. It doesn't promise peace. It only promises the end of uncertainty, and sometimes uncertainty is easier to live with than the truth. Some family members want everything exposed, no matter the cost. Others hesitate, already sensing what confirmation might demand of them, which relationships it might destroy, which cherished memories it might poison. Tension fractures the family along invisible fault lines that have existed for years. Old arguments resurface, now reframed through the lens of suspicion. Innocent moments are reinterpreted, gestures once seen as kindness now tinged with guilt. The case isn't just reopening wounds. It's rewriting history, and that is a violence of its own. Investigators watch this unfold with a mix of sympathy and detachment. They know that solving the case will not restore what was lost. It will only replace one form of pain with another. Media pressure intensifies as whispers solidify into rumors. Headlines speculate about an imminent arrest, about a shocking betrayal, about a secret hidden in plain sight for decades. The narrative grows ahead of the facts, fueled by anonymous sources and half-understood leaks. Detectives hate this part. Publicity can force hands, harden defenses, push suspects into silence or flight. But it can also do something else. It can make it harder to keep lying, especially when the lie has been propped up by collective denial. The suspect's behavior changes. Friends notice withdrawal, irritability, a fixation on past grievances. Someone mentions overhearing a late-night phone call, a voice raised, words like "after all this time" and "they can't prove anything" slipping through the walls. It's reported. It's logged. It's added to the growing mosaic of circumstantial evidence that still isn't enough, but feels increasingly suffocating. Investigators revisit the location one more time, not because they expect to find new evidence, but because places remember things people try to forget. They stand in the same spaces where key moments unfolded, measuring distances, imagining movement, reconstructing choices. One detective notices how close everything is, how easy it would have been for someone familiar with the environment to control the situation, to act quickly, decisively, without attracting attention. The crime doesn't look random from here. It looks rehearsed, or at least anticipated. A breakthrough comes not from technology or strategy, but from fatigue. A secondary witness, someone who has lived on the edge of the case for years, finally asks to speak again. Their health is failing. They don't want to die carrying this. What they offer isn't a confession, not directly, but a confirmation, an admission that they suspected the truth early on and chose silence. They describe a conversation that took place shortly after the disappearance, words spoken in confidence, heavy with implication, a clear understanding that something terrible had happened and that acknowledging it would ruin lives. This testimony changes the calculus. It doesn't prove guilt, but it proves knowledge, and knowledge has legal weight. Prosecutors see a path forward now, narrow but navigable. They begin preparing, building a case that doesn't rely on a single decisive moment, but on the cumulative force of years of deception, of opportunities to tell the truth deliberately avoided. The suspect is confronted with this new reality, not aggressively, but firmly. They are told, plainly, that the walls are closing in, that the narrative they've maintained is no longer holding, that others are talking. For the first time, something flickers across their face, not fear, but exhaustion. The performance has gone on too long. The cost has been too high. For a moment, it seems like the dam might finally break. But decades of secrecy don't unravel easily. The suspect stops short of confession, offering partial truths, reframing events, acknowledging mistakes without admitting intent. It's a strategy as old as crime itself: give just enough to appear cooperative, but not enough to condemn yourself. Investigators push, aware that this may be the closest they ever get to the core of the truth. As night falls on the city, the case hangs in a precarious balance. Arrest warrants are drafted but not signed. Statements are reviewed, revised, weighed. The family waits, suspended between dread and hope, knowing that whatever comes next will change everything. And somewhere beneath all of it, the cold case pulses with new heat, no longer dormant, no longer content to linger in the shadows, demanding resolution even as it threatens to tear apart everything it touches. The question is no longer whether the truth will surface. It's how much damage it will do when it finally does. The final hours of the investigation do not feel triumphant. They feel fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Inside the precinct, lights hum softly over desks cluttered with decades of paper and the quiet knowledge that this is as far as the road goes, one way or another. No one raises their voice. No one celebrates. Every movement is deliberate, restrained, shaped by the understanding that the truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back, and that justice, even when achieved, rarely feels like victory. The suspect sits alone for a long time before anyone speaks again. Time has done what pressure could not. It has worn down resistance, not into confession, but into something more honest and more unsettling. When the questioning resumes, the tone changes. There is no longer an attempt to trap, no dramatic reveal of evidence. Instead, there is a simple invitation, a chance to explain how things spiraled, how a moment became a lifetime, how silence grew heavier with every passing year. The room is still. The city outside keeps breathing, unaware that an old secret is finally struggling for air. The story that emerges is incomplete, fractured, offered in pieces that resist forming a clean narrative. There is acknowledgement without admission, regret without full responsibility, a careful balancing act between truth and self-preservation. The suspect speaks of fear, of consequences imagined and real, of choices made quickly and justified endlessly afterward. They speak of love warped by control, of desperation mistaken for necessity, of a belief that once enough time passed, the past would lose its power. They are wrong about that. Time has only sharpened it. Investigators listen, recording every word, aware that what's being said may never satisfy anyone fully. There is no cinematic confession, no single sentence that explains everything. Instead, there is a gradual unveiling of motive, opportunity, and awareness, enough to understand what happened without ever hearing the words everyone has waited decades for. The truth arrives sideways, indirect, but unmistakable in its shape. This was not an accident of fate. It was the result of choices, small and catastrophic, made by people who believed they could live with them. When the interview ends, the room feels emptier, as if something essential has slipped out unnoticed. Legal teams move in, careful and precise, parsing language, debating interpretation. Charges are discussed, then reconsidered. The law demands certainty, and certainty is exactly what time has eroded. Prosecutors weigh the evidence, the statements, the likelihood of conviction, and they do so knowing that pursuing justice and securing it are not the same thing. A case can be morally clear and legally fragile at the same time. The family is called in. Not all of them. Only those who need to hear it directly. What they are told is measured, restrained, but devastating. There are no graphic details, no unnecessary cruelty, just confirmation of what many of them have feared for years, that the truth was closer than they ever allowed themselves to believe. Some react with anger, some with numbness, some with a strange, hollow relief. Knowing doesn't heal them. It simply ends the waiting, and that, in itself, is overwhelming. Old alliances fracture completely now. Words that were never spoken are finally voiced, accusations surface, denials collapse. The family secret, once a vague, oppressive presence, becomes defined, and in becoming defined, it loses the power to hide. But it gains another power instead, the ability to rewrite memories, to contaminate even the good ones. Every shared holiday, every laugh, every moment of trust is reevaluated under the harsh light of what was concealed. Publicly, the resolution is careful, almost cautious. Officials announce that the investigation has reached its conclusion, that significant findings have been made, that the case is no longer unsolved. They choose their words with precision, aware of legal boundaries and ethical obligations. Headlines explode anyway, twisting nuance into certainty, branding the story with words like solved and shocking, even as the reality remains more complicated, more painful, more human than any headline can contain. Some in the city feel vindicated. Others feel betrayed. Many feel both. The cold case that once belonged to rumor and speculation now belongs to history, but history offers no comfort. There are no parades for this kind of ending. No applause. Just a collective exhale, followed by an uneasy silence as people absorb what it means that the truth was there all along, hidden not by darkness, but by familiarity. The suspect retreats from public view, a life narrowed by scrutiny, by consequence, by the weight of what can no longer be denied, even if it can't be fully punished. Justice, in its purest form, remains elusive. There is accountability, but not the kind that balances the scales. The law moves forward, but it cannot rewind time, cannot restore what was taken, cannot answer every question that still echoes unanswered in the margins of the case file. In the end, what remains is not closure, but clarity. The case is no longer a mystery, but it is still a tragedy. It stands as a reminder that some crimes don't vanish because they are unsolvable, but because solving them requires confronting truths too close, too destructive, too costly to face. And when those truths finally surface, they do not arrive like salvation. They arrive like a reckoning. The city moves on, as it always does. Streets fill with new stories, new lives, new secrets. But beneath the noise, the resolved cold case leaves its mark, a quiet warning etched into memory. That silence can be a choice. That time does not forgive. And that the most haunting mysteries are not the ones hidden in shadows, but the ones concealed in plain sight, waiting patiently for the moment when they can no longer be contained. Even after the case is declared resolved, the echo doesn't fade. Resolution, it turns out, is not an ending but a transformation. The story changes shape, from a question mark into a scar, and scars have a way of aching long after the wound has closed. In the weeks that follow the announcement, the city reacts in fragments, snippets of conversation overheard on trains, quiet debates in coffee shops, arguments carried out in low voices as if speaking too loudly might summon the past back into the room. People say the words cold case like they mean something finished, but their tone betrays them. Finished is not the same as over. Inside the family, life becomes a careful negotiation between what can be spoken and what must remain unvoiced. Some members demand details, hungry for every fact, every admission, believing that understanding each moment might dull the pain. Others retreat, refusing to hear more, convinced that too much knowledge will poison whatever peace they have left. They are all grieving now, not just the loss of a loved one, but the loss of a version of their history that can never be recovered. Trust, once fractured, doesn't mend cleanly. It shifts, it settles into something unfamiliar, and everyone must decide whether they can live with its new shape. The investigators feel the aftermath differently. There is relief, yes, but it's muted, tempered by the knowledge of what justice could not do. They close the file, archive the evidence, and move on to other cases, but this one follows them in subtle ways, and how they phrase questions, and how long they linger over inconsistencies, and how skeptical they've become of easy explanations. A cold case solved late teaches a specific kind of lesson, that delay is not neutral, that every year without truth compounds the damage, spreading it outward into lives that had nothing to do with the original crime. Public attention spikes one last time, then begins its slow retreat. Documentaries are proposed, articles written, timelines reconstructed with ominous music and dramatic narration. The story becomes content, packaged and consumed, and some find that unsettling, the idea that decades of pain can be compressed into an hour-long program. Others welcome it, hoping that retelling the story might prevent another like it, that visibility might be the only justice still available. The debate itself becomes part of the legacy of the case, proof that even solved mysteries leave behind unresolved arguments. The suspect's name fades from headlines but not from memory. They live on, constrained by consequence even in the absence of a definitive verdict, their identity permanently tethered to what happened. Some believe this is not enough. Others believe it is too much. The law draws its lines imperfectly, and everyone involved is left standing somewhere near the edges, dissatisfied but resigned. There is no clean moral arithmetic here, no outcome that balances loss against accountability in a way that feels fair. Years later, someone new moves into the old neighborhood, unaware of what unfolded there, and life continues with a kind of innocent momentum. Children play on sidewalks where adults once whispered theories late into the night. Buildings stand where they always have, indifferent to memory. But stories have a way of seeping into the ground. Locals still pause when they pass certain corners, still lower their voices when the case comes up, still feel the faint chill of recognition when they hear the phrase cold case used in another context, another city, another tragedy. The family marks anniversaries differently now. No longer with pleas for answers, but with remembrance shaped by hard-earned truth. They speak the victim's name without qualifiers, without speculation, without the desperate edge of uncertainty. It doesn't make the loss lighter, but it makes it real in a way it never was before. Mourning finally has something solid to rest against, even if it's painful. What the case ultimately leaves behind is a warning disguised as a story. That proximity can blind. That silence can masquerade as protection. That time does not bury truth, it only delays its consequences. And that when answers finally arrive, they rarely bring the comfort people imagine. They bring clarity, and clarity demands responsibility from everyone who touches it. The cold case, once a symbol of mystery, becomes a symbol of something else entirely, a testament to how easily a crime can hide among ordinary lives, how long it can survive on denial alone, and how devastating it can be when the truth finally insists on being known. The city absorbs it, the way it absorbs everything, and moves forward, carrying the lesson quietly, imperfectly, into whatever story comes next.